Most people think God placed the tree of knowledge of good and evil in the Garden of Eden to test Adam and Eve. But the real reason is far more profound than a simple test, and it reveals something shocking about the nature of love itself. Here's what most Bible readers miss. If God already knew Adam and Eve would eat from the tree, why put it there at all? It seems cruel, almost like setting them up to fail. Unless the tree served a purpose so fundamental to existence that without it, everything God created would be meaningless. To understand this, we need to start with what the Bible actually says about God's nature. 1 John chapter 4 tells us something radical. It doesn't say God has love or shows love, it says God is love. That's not poetic language. That's a statement about his fundamental essence. Think about what that means. Love isn't just something God does, it's what he is at his core. Every action flows from this nature. When God creates, he creates from love. When he speaks from love. He cannot act outside this nature any more than fire can stop being hot. But here's where it gets interesting. What is love actually? We throw that word around constantly, but the Bible defines it very specifically. Love is action directed toward another. You cannot love in isolation. You cannot love yourself alone. Love requires an object, a recipient, someone other than yourself. God demonstrates this perfectly. Before creation existed, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit existed in perfect relationship. Infinite, complete, self-sufficient love flowing between them eternally. God didn't need to create anything. He wasn't lonely. He wasn't bored. He wasn't incomplete. So why create it all? Out of the overflow of that perfect love, God wanted to share what the Trinity had always experienced. He wanted other beings to know this love, to participate in it, to receive it and return it. Now watch what happens next, because this is where most people's understanding completely breaks down. If God is going to create beings to love, those beings must have the capacity to choose, not the illusion of choice, not predetermined responses disguised as decisions. Actual, genuine, could-go-either-way choice. Why? Because forced love isn't love at all. If someone programs a robot to say, "I love you" every morning, does that robot actually love them? Of course not. It's just executing code. There's no relationship there, no genuine affection, no real connection. The same principle applies to psychological manipulation. If you could rewire someone's brain to make them incapable of not loving you, would they truly love you? No. They'd be your prisoner. That's not love. That's domination wearing love's mask. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Love, by its very nature, must be free. It must involve risk. It must include the terrifying possibility of rejection. Without that possibility, you don't have love. You have something else entirely. But God faces a unique problem that we don't. He is truth itself. Hebrews chapter 6 says, it's impossible for God to lie. Not difficult, not unlikely, impossible. It contradicts his fundamental nature. This creates a fascinating limitation. God cannot give his creatures the mere illusion of free will while secretly controlling their choices. Why not? Because he would know he's deceiving them. He would know their choice to love him is fake, programmed, predetermined. Even if the creatures themselves believed they were choosing freely, God would know the truth. And since God cannot lie to himself, cannot deny his own nature, cannot pretend something false is true, he cannot create that kind of fake freedom. So if God wants genuine love, he must create genuine freedom, real freedom. The kind where the outcome isn't guaranteed. The kind where rejection is actually possible. This is why the tree had to be there. Not as a trap, not as a gotcha moment. As an opportunity for authentic choice. Look at what God gave Adam and Eve. Perfect bodies, perfect environment, a stunning garden filled with every good thing. Meaningful work, companionship with each other, regular fellowship with God himself. Everything they could possibly need or want. Then he said something remarkably simple. You can eat from any tree in this garden except one. Just one. That single tree represented something crucial. It represented the choice between trusting God's character or questioning it, between accepting his definition of good and evil or deciding they needed to discover it independently, between relationship based on trust or relationship based on suspicion. Notice what God was really asking. Will you trust that I know what's best for you? Will you trust that my commands come from love, not from a desire to restrict you? Will you trust my character based on everything I've already shown you? The tree wasn't about obedience for obedience's sake. It was about trust, about whether they would take God at his word or demand to verify everything themselves. Think about what Adam and Eve had witnessed. God spoke, and light exploded into existence. He formed the earth, filled it with life, created the stars. He shaped Adam from dust and breathed life into him. He saw that Adam needed companionship and created Eve as his perfect partner. Every single thing God had done demonstrated his goodness, his creativity, his care for their well-being. They had zero evidence that God was anything other than completely trustworthy. Then a serpent shows up, a creature they just met, someone who had done absolutely nothing for them. And this stranger suggests that maybe God is holding out on them. Maybe God doesn't actually want what's best for them. Maybe God is threatened by them becoming too knowledgeable. Here's the devastating reality of what happened next. Adam and Eve took the word of a stranger over the God who had given them everything. They questioned the character of the one who had proven his love repeatedly. They decided they couldn't trust God to define right and wrong for them. That choice revealed something profound. It wasn't really about the fruit. It was about whether they believed God's love was genuine, whether they trusted his heart toward them. And this brings us to something most people never consider about that moment in the garden, something that changes everything about how we understand both the fall and God's response to it. What God was asking them wasn't unreasonable. He wasn't demanding blind obedience to arbitrary rules. He was asking for trust based on overwhelming evidence of his goodness. Every moment of their existence had been pure gift. They owed their very breath to him, and yet they chose suspicion over trust. Here's what makes this even more heartbreaking. When the serpent questioned God's motives, Adam and Eve had a choice about how to respond. They could have said, "Wait a second. God has been nothing but good to us. Why would we doubt him based on your suggestion?" They could have defended God's character. Instead, they entertained the accusation. They considered the possibility that God was holding out on them. The fruit itself had no magical properties. It wasn't poisonous. It wasn't inherently evil. The problem was what eating it represented. It represented Adam and Eve declaring independence from God's wisdom, announcing that they would determine good and evil for themselves, rejecting the idea that God's definition of right and wrong was sufficient. You see this pattern throughout human history. We constantly question whether God really knows what's best. We wonder if his commands are truly for our good, or if he's restricting us from something better. We suspect that maybe we'd be happier if we could just make our own rules. But look at what happened immediately after they ate. Did they gain the wisdom they were promised? Did they become like God in a positive way? No. The first thing they experienced was shame, then fear, then blame shifting and broken relationship. They wanted to discover good and evil independently. They got their wish, and the knowledge destroyed them, not because God was punishing them out of spite, but because they'd severed themselves from the source of life. They'd chosen to learn through painful experience rather than through trust. This is the tragedy of the fall. God had offered them a relationship based on demonstrated love and proven faithfulness. They rejected it for the empty promise of a stranger who had zero track record with them. Think about how insulting that must have been to God. After everything he'd done, they still didn't trust him. But here's what nobody talks about. God's response to their betrayal reveals something stunning about his character. He could have destroyed them instantly. They'd broken the one rule he'd given them. They'd essentially called him a liar and chosen to believe Satan instead. He would have been completely justified in wiping them out and starting over. He didn't do that. Instead, he came looking for them. Not to condemn them, though their actions deserved condemnation. He He came to cover their shame, to promise a future rescue, to set in motion a plan that would eventually restore what they'd broken. Even in their rebellion, even after they'd chosen a stranger's word over his, God still pursued them. This is where the whole story shifts. Because God's love isn't conditional on our perfect trust. His love continues even when we fail him. The tree revealed humanity's choice, yeah. But what happened after the tree revealed God's heart? He didn't abandon them. He didn't give up on the relationship. He promised that one day a seed would come who would crush the serpent's head, someone who would undo the damage. And that promise points forward to something incredible. Because while the first Adam failed the test of trust in a perfect garden, there would come a second Adam, someone who would face an even harder test in a wilderness, someone who would be tempted to question God's goodness when he was hungry and weak, someone who would be offered all the kingdoms of the world if he would just bow to Satan. But this second Adam would pass the test the first Adam failed. He would trust God completely, even when it led to a cross, even when it meant experiencing the full weight of humanity's broken choice. He would become the tree of life that humanity had forfeited. Not a wooden tree in a garden, but a wooden cross on a hill. See, the tree in Eden was about whether humanity would trust God's love. The tree on Calvary was about God demonstrating that his love was trustworthy all along. Adam and Eve questioned whether God truly wanted what was best for them. Jesus proved that God was willing to suffer and die to restore them. Means real risk. And God took that risk means real risk. And God took that risk because he knew something Adam and Eve didn't understand yet. He knew that even if they failed, even if they chose wrongly, even if they broke his heart, he would find a way to bring them back. Not by forcing them, but by showing them a love so profound that it would eventually draw them home. The test in the garden wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of the greatest rescue mission in history, a mission that would cost God everything and offer humanity everything, a mission that would transform that ancient tree of death into a tree of life for all who would trust the one who hung on it. That's the real answer to why the tree was there. It had to be there for love to be real, for choice to be meaningful, for relationship to be genuine. And when humanity made the wrong choice, God didn't abandon the plan. He doubled down on love. He became the solution to the problem that the tree revealed. Now you understand what was really at stake in that garden and what God was willing to do about it. The tree wasn't the problem. It was the solution to a problem most people never think about. How do you create beings capable of genuine love when love requires genuine freedom? And genuine freedom means the possibility of genuine betrayal? God didn't place that tree there hoping Adam and Eve would fail. He placed it there knowing that without it, their love for him would be meaningless. Without the option to choose differently, they'd just be sophisticated puppets acting out a script. And God doesn't want puppets. He never has. What happened in Eden revealed humanity's choice. But what happened after revealed God's character. We chose independence. He chose pursuit. We chose the serpent's lie. He chose to become the sacrifice. We rejected the tree of life. He became it, hanging on rough wood to bring us back. Every moment you question whether God's commands are really for your good, you're standing in that garden again. Every time you wonder if you'd be better off making your own rules, you're hearing the serpent's whisper. The question hasn't changed. Will you trust the one who created you, who knows you completely, who has demonstrated his love at incredible cost? Or will you decide you know better? That tree still stands, in a sense. Not in a physical garden, but in the daily choice between trust and suspicion, between accepting God's definition of good and evil or insisting on your own, between relationship built on his proven faithfulness or independence built on your limited understanding. The difference now is that you've seen what happened when humanity chose wrongly. You know where independence from God leads, and you've seen what God did about it. That changes everything.